Let me just start with this. So, right, my name is Mariela. I am a teaching faculty in the Antioch University Santa Barbara campus in the Latinx mental health concentration. And I also run a local nonprofit counseling center with my wife. And so all of this today just coming together is just so exciting to see, and to see everyone from across different places bringing different perspectives, because that's really what this is all about. And I want that to also be a part of what we do here today. So I'm gonna put up a presentation, but if you ever need to just sort of put something in the chat, I will do my best to pay attention as well as I can, and all of that fun stuff. But we'll do a little presentation just so that I make sure that I don't chat for hours with all of you, which is what I'd really like to do. Okay, so the presentation today is on the thoughts, really just thoughts on the Latinx parenthood. You know, I realized one day that actually I'm Mariela, yes, absolutely, but I'm also mama. That's what our son calls us. He calls me mama, he calls his other parent mom. And, you know, I wanna honestly acknowledge that, you know, when I first sat down to come up with a conversation for this particular symposium, my head went straight to that big stuff, right? The big usual stuff that I typically speak about in a lot of the classes that I teach, whether it be sexual orientation or gender or mestizaje, age, all of that. And then I stopped and thought to myself, you know what, Mariela, see if there's something else there. And pretty instantly, a little tiny push brought me to this place of exploring parenthood and what it's meant to me in the past 15 years. It's pretty clear to me that when we talk about this, obviously those other aspects of my identity will come into the conversation, just as they will for you. But that I haven't always given the space, time, and energy to really acknowledge and explore this part of my identity as being just as meaningful, and not just as meaningful, but maybe just as specifically named as other parts of who I am as a person. And so as we sort of start this journey today, I think I need to start by acknowledging the ancestors and my family that have been a huge part of my journey. There is a long line of parents in all of our histories, and I want to acknowledge that and their experience for both the light and the shadow that has been present along the way as I and we carve our own paths in this identity. So, you know, and I also just want to mention, my camera is really dark because the light in my office will not stay on. So that's what that is. But it just kind of hit me when I said that light and shadow piece. So I thought I would share with y'all what this morning has been like. So, all right, let's jump in. So, you know, as I mentioned, that's how I landed here. I didn't land on this topic because I purport to be any sort of expert in the parenting field. In fact, I'm still figuring it out. My wife and I have been at it for 15 years with our son, and I think every day we are newly navigating it and looking for what it actually means from day to day for us. But I think this is an important step in just recognizing that we do need to foster it. We need to flow with this aspect of our identity. And my thought was to bring it forward for all of us to have an opportunity to begin the process of touching on it, honoring it, and moving within and around it. All right, so it seems to make sense to start with the basic question of what does it mean for us to be parents, right? What does it mean for us to identify as such? And I think when I think about that, I can pretty easily come up with some broad givens that I think many of us can ascribe to. And some of those are listed here. So that idea that we as parents are figures that care, oops, sorry about that. That's me playing too many things here. Let me go back to, there we go. it's us supporting or nurturing a child, right? Or being a provider of very concrete things like financial stability, basic needs, safe space, right? Or it can often be, this idea that we're a source of guidance, of support. We sort of carve a path by being torchbearers for our kids, of maybe the journey that we'd like to see them take or that we want to support them on. For some of us, there are very specific, maybe a little bit tighter identities like disciplinarian or teacher or advocate or friend, in this journey. And whatever it is, I think those are things that we can all sort of make sense of as general topics. But what I want us to do today is go beyond that a little bit more specifically into the area of exploration of what it means to be a Latinx parent. You know, what is it like to be called mama? What is it like to be, jefe or apa or machi or papa, whatever language you use, and what sort of accompanies that? What layers are added to that identity, beyond sort of this broad brushstroke of parenting? And so what I'd love to invite you to do, just sort of to start out and to get your own, thoughts and feelings and juices flowing, is if you want to throw in the chat some ideas of, if I say, what does it mean to you to be a Latinx parent? Whether you are a parent now, whether you work with parents, whether you hope to be a parent, whether you think parents are just interesting people, please feel free to share that in the chat. I'd love to just hear some ideas as we kind of go through this. Mentor, yes, love it. Absolutely. Cool. So as I mentioned, another piece of this topic that I wanted to explore and we'd be more specific about, that y'all are thinking about right now as you think about what it means to be a Latinx parent, is to consider the fact that as a person, I am very clear of the intersecting identities that I have. And a huge one for me is Latinx identity. Yeah. And some folks are already mentioning that piece of the mixed identities of who we are, and how all of those aspects and my Latinx identity, how that shapes so many aspects of how I walk in the world. And it's woven into how I walk the parent walk. I don't always think about it. I don't wake up every morning and say, oh my goodness, good morning, Mariela, you're a Latinx parent, here's what you need to do. Or, oh, Mariela, you're a queer parent, here's what that means. But it's there for me every day in the decisions I make, in the ways that I present in the world. And so for the purposes of today's talk then, what I want to do is just touch on some of the ideas listed here. And before we go on, I need to acknowledge that this is a very, very simple list. There is so much complexity to this topic that 1 hour can't hold. But I think it's a place for us to start to be able to sort of point to some of the main issues that do show up for us pretty commonly. Okay. So let's start with these. Let's start with those Latinx values that we've probably all heard talked about, or maybe in our textbooks, that sort of make up our picture or idea of who Latinx folks are. Okay, so with familismo, our first concept here, basically it's this concept of there being some sort of level of family loyalty for folks who identify as Latinx individuals, a desire, a willingness to be active and contributing to the well-being of the family and the extended network. It's a value that's very much celebrated and acknowledged when it's part of someone's identity. There's an expectation of respeto in relationship. So an acknowledgement of sort of a hierarchy of respect that's held for parents or older family members. And the way that sort of shows up in the way that we engage is through an attitude of obedience and politeness. Does that mean that, all kids are obedient and polite at every age? No, absolutely not. But it does start to shape how we are then creating guidance and expectations of ourselves and our kids. Okay. And a third that I wanted to just throw in there as well was this concept of personalismo, which is an emphasis on personal relationships, an acknowledgement of the weight and power and importance of the relationships in our lives, right? And when we think of these definitely point towards a very collectivistic worldview. They point towards something beyond just ourselves as small units, right? And so, yes, the parent-child unit is important, but just as important is the unit, that the way that unit then relates to broader units, sort of these concentric circles, right? So how does the parent-child unit then relate to their extended family unit? And how does that extended family unit relate to the community? And how is that community seen in the broader, the broader community outside of maybe like a neighborhood or something like that? And so there's a lot of layers there of relationship that the parent-child small relationship has an impact on and is impacted by. Okay. This obviously sets the stage for what become sometimes expectations, guidelines for us of what we are meant to pass on as well. Very early on, I got the message from my family that family comes first. And I can tell you, I've heard that for the past 15 years with whenever I share that, maybe our son is out hanging out with his friends. Well, make sure he also spends some time with the family, right? So even in small ways, but certainly in the big ways that we parent and send messages to each other. They form how we are meant to keep our children engaged and perpetuate connections within our family structures. And there's a lot of pressure to do that. I think these are all aspects certainly worth investing in, because when we think about them, we can see that there are some really protective value. There's a lot of protective value to them. For one, they promote community. They promote connection. They can certainly be fonts of resources and support. And at the same time, like I said, they can be a source of pressure. And they don't just happen seamlessly. We're made to sometimes feel and think that this is going to be seamless, an easy transition to go from being a non-parent to a parent who then very easily instills these values in our own children. When in reality, we are navigating multiple layers of intersectionality and the contexts that we live in that will shift our ability to do this. Okay. So then that leads me to this idea that, there are things that Latinx parents are also navigating in addition to being a parent that may make our process of finding comfort and confidence in our identity as a parent a little more challenging. Let's do this. Let's tackle the first one. Okay. So when we think of some of those added layers of what we're dealing with as Latinx parents, we land on this concept of acculturation, which is a process that we understand as something that we all undergo, in which we are working to adopt or adjust or fit in or make sense of either a new culture, a different culture. It can be multiple cultures around us. And what often ends up happening is that we end up struggling to find and strike that perfect balance between these different cultures, these different ways of being. We struggle to find that balance not only for ourselves, but also in the eyes of others, because we do put a lot of stake in the way that others see us and experience us. And I think especially when we think of Latinx identity, around parenthood, we know that because of the importance of the family, because of the importance of those concepts that I just mentioned, those eyes are always on us from our elders, right? And there are ideas and judgment there. And so as we try to navigate that balance, there can be a lot of friction, a lot of dissonance. in how we may see ourselves and how others may see us. And that dissonance certainly affects our confidence, or how confident we are in what works for us and what ultimately truly represents us at the stage that we are at. Okay. So when we think of what some of the common sources of acculturative stress are for parents with Latinx identities, and I want to be clear, this is Latinx folks in the US, particularly is what I'm sort of speaking to. And I'm speaking to that because, that's the experience that I'm coming from. But this idea of what are some sources that are common for us of stress, we can certainly point to some of these things here on the PowerPoint, and obviously many more. So it's not uncommon to hear concerns about things like language, what language the child or the family speaks, what cultural traditions we adhere to, what discipline styles we use. Certainly just to name a few, there's many more, and we'll talk a little bit about a few more, but this is just to get us rolling, and acknowledging how much more broad and layers our identities are, as parents, right? It's not just about providing for our children, guiding our children, but it's also how we are representing for our families, our communities, our ethnicity, our identification, right? And that can be a huge source of pressure. And when we've got pressure, it's an energy drain, not only from the work that we are meant to be doing as a parent, but the work that we're meant to be doing on ourselves and on our relationships and those other aspects of who we are. Okay. So, for instance, I want to start first with the long language one, right? And feel free, at any point to be putting stuff in the chat about some of the acculturative issues that present stress for you. But for instance, if I was to ask for a show of hands or do a poll, I would imagine that there'd be a few of us who maybe have questioned our competence as parents, or our ability to do this job well if our child doesn't speak to their abuelos in Spanish, right? What does that mean about us as parents? What does it mean about our commitment to our cultural and family values, right? Think about how often we've maybe asked ourselves if we're doing it right if we don't use cultural or corporal punishment, right? So that whole idea of the chancla culture. So many of us are wanting to heal that as part of our identity, whether it was a part of our growing up or not. There's the funny memes and all that, but we need to go beyond that. That is not who we are, for a lot of us. And we're trying to heal that. Does that mean I'm not either a good enough parent in Latinx eyes? Does it mean that I'm not Latinx enough? What does that actually then bring forward for us? We ask questions around cultural practices like, do we have to do a quinceañera, right? Do I have to have piñatas at all the birthday parties? I mean, honestly, heck, why not? Like, I think a piñata could be an every morning affair. That would be kind of cool. But, you do you. But it does bring up questions when we aren't necessarily engaging in the ways in which those before us have done these things, right? The reality too is that these are very direct and pointed questions that obviously don't have an answer. And we don't often have the luxury of time and space to really be able to process through what all of this means, whether it's the details of the situation or the feelings that we're having about the situation or what it means for our current relationships and relationships of future generations. Because honestly, being a parent is just very practically demanding, right? It takes all of our time. And so we don't often create the space to be able to be quiet with this stuff and work through it. Okay? And so that tension builds, and that tension sort of simmers and creates rough patches along the way that we can get caught on every now and then. And then we let loose and find ourselves there again down the line. Another important piece that I want us to just kind of acknowledge and touch on is what our family structures actually look like, right? We know that there are multiple ways that families can look, but typically Latinx families have, or Latinx narratives have told us that there is a mother and a father, and there are certain ways in that they show up, and we'll talk a little bit about gender roles, but we have to be open to these different ways in which our family structures do show up. We have to recognize that the way that the family is structured will also influence the energy, the approach, the ways in which we engage, right? So when we think of that, we need to acknowledge that there may be single parent families, there may be same-sex families, there may be families where aunts, uncles, grandparents, brothers, sisters are the caregivers, right? So how does that influence the identity of the person who's assuming the role of parent? Who else plays a role in the family? That's always huge, right? Who is maybe there to provide support as an extended family member? And then we have to be honest and ask ourselves the question of who's maybe there to provide a little too much support, right? Call it what you will. It could be support, it might not, okay? Are we on display to other family members? Are people watching us? Do we have a distance, or are we constantly on display? Are we performing the role of parent without being able to fully feel into it, right? And do we have community around us, right? For me, I can definitely say all my family is back in Michigan. Don't ask me why they're in Michigan, but they're in Michigan. And I'm in California here with my wife and our son. And we have her parents here, but that's all we have. And that's a huge piece for me. It's a huge struggle. At times, I really value the space that I have to become my own person as a parent. And yet there are also many times in where I wonder, what have I lost by not having that sort of support network around me, whether it be to provide tangible support, like watching Sebastian and maybe being the ones who teach him Spanish while I can't, or being the folks who then have some sort of perspective on some of the things that we're sharing and teaching him. So it creates a lot of questioning that, again, oftentimes instead of being able to spend time and acknowledge and work through, we stuff down and we just keep pushing it farther and farther down. Okay? And so we have to acknowledge too that there's also this other aspect of who is, if there is another parent, who is the other parent? What is their identity? Right? What does that mean in terms of the identity issues that they bring to the table? Are we processing together? Are we processing in different directions? Is there an exchange of perspective and willingness to explore that, right? And I have to say, I feel like one of the luckiest people on the planet. My wife is a white woman, and this is a place where I almost feel like she's created more space for me to be able to do this than I've ever created and acknowledged. And so it really is about, the reality that there's other folks involved in this process as well. And a lot of what our journey looks like depends on how we are able to engage with the other. I need to hold space for what my identities mean, not only for me, but then how they impact her, and vice versa, how her identities impact me in the way that I parent and the way that I might experience myself as well. I mean, they're not easy conversations to have, right? You don't just have these in 10 minutes and you're done and you're good. There has to be a lot of love and energy sort of put forward around all of this. And so here we are. Of course, we have to talk about gender roles, okay? There's no way that we can ignore the role of gender in our identities around anything, right? And I mean, the whole theme of our symposium this year is around our intersecting identities. So I'd be remiss not to be naming this. And this one really is everywhere where we look. I think it is likely safe to say that generally speaking, and I always want to make sure that it's clear, it's hard because we speak in generalities, but we don't want to get pigeonholed. But generally speaking, traditional gender roles do dominate the Latinx narrative. And I think that is certainly still true in how we understand people as parents in the Latinx community. We tend to hold on to ideas that create a very binary look to parents and relationships. Ideally, I think, like I was saying earlier, in terms of family structure, the Latinx narrative will ask for and hope for a male and female partner because it reinforces that binary. And we tend to have ideas around what the female and masculine role are in parenting, right? So, some of the things that often show up is this idea that being the male parent means that you are the provider, right? You're the disciplinarian. You're a lot more hands off. You're there to kind of get things done, keep things moving forward. And that is the way in which you express your care, concern, and love for your child and or family. Whereas the feminine role, the female parent, is often viewed as being the much more hands-on parent, the one who nurtures, the one who educates, the one who sort of guides around those little things and on a daily basis with the child. And that's the way in which love, care, and support is demonstrated for family and child. And these are really limiting, right? When we prescribe these identities to folks and make them feel as if that is a marker of their ability or their a limit to their ability, folks may not be able to absorb other ways of being a parent, right? I think this is definitely something that's shifting slowly as we are exposed to different cultures and more information and more possibility. And I also absolutely want to acknowledge that these are sort of the broad narratives. Within our particular families, I think we can all stop and think a little bit about this and recognize that actually many of the folks who identify as parents in our families have made the roles their own. I think of my abuelita and my abuelito on my dad's side, right? Abuelita took care of everything at home. Everybody knew, she knew what was going on, right? And to boot, she would have a little coronita at the end of every day just to celebrate how badass she was. So yay to her. But on the outside, externally, the family saw my abuelo as, the man of the house, the one who went out and took care of things. And, he was a disciplinarian. But as soon as that door closed, she took on all of those roles, even for him, right? So recognizing that there's something about a public facing persona of our identity as parent, and certainly also the private facing aspect of our identity as a parent as well. And for some of us, we are trying to figure out how to make those align, how to make those make sense for us, because we can keep the distinctions for a while, and then at some point it becomes hard to carry. At some point it becomes difficult to not be living our truths. And this is an invitation for us to start to do that. Oh, I forgot to mention the other piece too. There's this gender role piece trickles down then also to how we treat our children, how we're supposed to raise our children. I did that entre comillas. I don't know if you folks can see me, but anyway, entre comillas, supposed to. There's no supposed to. We're letting go of that. Raise our children based on the genders that they appear to be, right? So this idea that we have to keep girls, precious girls, and girls are precious. But guess what? Boys are precious too. Genderqueer folks are precious too. Okay. Everyone deserves protection. Um, everyone deserves structure and love and support. And yet sometimes we fall into this idea of that's reserved for girls, for boys, it's about encouraging an adventurous nature and an independent and tough exterior. And if we were to stop and be able to talk about that with each other, we would recognize we want all of that and more for each and every one of our children of whatever identity they are, right? So we hold space for that. And I think that really will continue to add to the beautiful range of who we are as Latinx parents and hopefully all parents. Okay. Let me just check my time. Whew. Okay, Mariela, you got this. Okay, the socio-political factors that I just want to mention. So when we look at the socio-political factors, this is a very, very short list, again, because of the time. But I wanted to highlight some of these because they are very sort of concrete, tangible pieces that come from the exterior and very powerfully impact our internal and emotional experiences as well. So our socioeconomic status and our relationship to socioeconomic status, this very practically impacts our ability to be present for our children and families. All of us have different ways in which this shows up. But I mention this because there's also this dominant culture messaging around our socioeconomic status that tells us that one, Latinx folks are only thought to succeed at certain levels or in certain areas. And, our goal as parents should be to get our kids to the next level, to get our kids to succeed, to represent for the community, to be something different or better than. And that's fine and great and wonderful, but not at the expense of honoring all aspects of who we are. And recognizing that by contributing to all aspects of who we are, we actually do foster success. It just might be a different definition of success. So not putting all of our emphasis on being a good parent around where our kids end up in the future in terms of their career, their ability to make money, their ability to, I don't know, be some fancy person. Aren't we all fancy at some point? I think so. Okay. And so I just wanted to name that and acknowledge that because there is also a lot of pressure around our sense and the connection that we make around being a good parent as being one who can provide. And my invitation is for us to recognize that providing is not just about giving our kids, money to go out every weekend or a car at 16. Our ability to provide is about being able to talk to them around the message of socioeconomic status, talk to them around their relationships and their well-being, and to go beyond. Another piece that may not land the same for all of us, obviously, is immigration status. For some of us, we may be, so for instance, I'm first generation, was born here. My experience is different than my parents who were not born here. We have kids who are coming to the United States now, who will be parents in 20 years, right? Recognizing though that different experiences around immigration not only impact the moment, but then obviously impact the trajectory and the intergenerational trauma that we experience. And as I talked earlier, just about that long lineage of parents and parent experiences that do inform who we are, okay? And so we want to recognize that the immigration status that folks are sort of trying to navigate in a lot of cases can be a source of a lot of family secrets, whether it be to maintain safety, whether it be to maintain some sort of anonymity around this, or whether it's a source of shame. And it can certainly create an atmosphere of fear for folks. And we know that all of those things suck energy away from what we want to be doing, which is being fully present, vulnerable, open, with ourselves and with our kids and families. And then local community. I just want to recognize that we're all over the country here today that are here in the symposium and in our different talks. We all have different experiences around what's available, what's safe, right? Am I in a community where Latinx parents are visible, where I'm not the only one who's, talking a certain way to my child, or who's mentioning a certain thing, or having my child wear a certain thing? Is it safe for me to be parenting in the way that is comfortable for maybe my closer knit community, right? And that's going to be different for folks, whether you are in the South, in the Midwest, in the Northeast, on the West Coast. And we have to give each other some grace and space around that, and recognize that not all of us have the same luxury as others around having community to rely on and to call on for support, right? And, and I just want to acknowledge that all of these things that I've talked about so far, it's not that parents who are not Latinx don't have their own things, but I think we need to be able to own and name for ourselves and for our communities what these things are, so that we can address them, right? All right. And so here we are. All that stuff's going on, all that, like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? And yet we're doing it, y'all. We are raising kids. There are Latinx kids out there running around all over the place, okay? And they're doing great. So how are we doing this? We are doing it because we claim our strengths. We are doing it when we claim our strengths, okay? We are doing it because no hay de otra, right? This is what we got to do, and we're up for it. My invitation is to recognize that we do have tools at our disposal, okay? We do have extended networks. And like I said, like everything, there's maybe some good and bad to that, but how can I mine my extended networks for good? How can I choose folks that I want to invite into that circle and ask for what I need, and be able to reciprocate in that relationship, right? Staying open to the wide wealth of knowledge sharing that is there for us. I mean, how many of you have heard story upon story about your own families, or even just cultural stories about family rearing that have informed the way that we do what we do, right? We've got dichos and consejos to last us a lifetime. Those little, in English, like sayings, like, yeah, that kind of thing. Sorry, my mind goes blank when I only think of things like in Spanish. Okay, so yeah, little witty things, little quotes, that kind of thing. We've got those to make sense of things, to bring light to situations, sometimes even to lighten the mood, to have us think about things differently in a non-threatening way. So those dichos and consejos can be really, really important, even though they're tiny little tools that we might have there. And quite honestly, we have a history of resilience, not just in parenting, but as peoples, right? And that resilience in all aspects of who we are, it simmers, it lives, it's absorbed in who we are. And so why not channel that also towards our questions, our lack of, confianza around being a parent, and just allow that to inform the process for us, okay? And we also continue to do this because we don't do it alone. We can continue to support each other in this, okay? How do we do that? Pretty simple, okay? You'll see that after you're done, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I knew all this stuff, but sometimes we just need to talk about it, okay? We need to be open with our stories. We need to be able to say, you know what? I don't know what to do about this. Like, my family wants me to do this. I don't want to do this. Let's talk about it with someone else like-minded who might be able to give you some perspective. Okay? when we keep our stories too close and we start to let cobwebs sort of gather on them, then they become less and less effective and we start to question them more and more. So bring them forward. We get to rewrite the rules as this new generation and get rid of those rules. Again, entre comillas, those are rules. Those are not true. They were given the word rules, but they're not necessarily true. And we want to rewrite those and make them more broad, because when we stick to them too rigidly, we breed judgment and expectation. And I, for one, don't want to participate anymore in that. I'm not here to judge anybody else. I don't have space to judge anybody else. I'm way too busy judging myself. And that's another thing. You got to stop judging yourself, but that's for another day. But honestly, if I hold on to that too tightly, sometimes as a way to sort of prove my Latinx identity or to prove my membership in a particular group, I'm hurting not only the other person and the process that I'm hoping to engage in, but I'm hurting myself and I'm hurting future generations by not allowing space for possibility, curiosity, and adaptability. Okay. And so I just want to close out with, oops, there we go. The bottom line for me is this, right? Obviously, being a parent is way more than just a job or a role or an identity. It is another part of the whole of me, that wholeness of me that deserves attention, that deserves energy, that deserves curiosity and love and heck, humility, a little humor, sometimes a little sarcasm, all of that. It is another part of the whole that deserves as much attention as anything else. Again, not only for me, but for, my wife, who is a partner in this with me, for our son, who is a partner in this with me, and for anyone that he comes in contact with in the future, and his descendants, who will be our ancestors one day. Okay. And so that is enough for us to keep going in this, even on those days where we question every little bit of it. And I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen, and for the ancestors that have gotten us here. And of course, I couldn't do this without good old Mama and Papa, who pushed and pushed and still have ideas of how I should be doing this. But hey, it wouldn't be them if it wasn't so. So much love to them and all of you.